Welcome to the Masters of Automation podcast series. In today's episode, we have Professor Tom Davenport with us. Welcome, Professor. It's a pleasure to have you join.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Tom Davenport is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson, the co-founder of the International Institute for Analytics, a fellow of the MIT Initiative for the Digital Economy, and a senior advisor to Deloitte Analytics. He has written or edited 20 books and over 250 print or digital articles for Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, the Financial Times, and many other publications. He earned his Ph.D. from Harvard and has taught at HBS, the University of Chicago, the Tuck School of Business, BU, and University of Texas in Austin. One of HBR's most frequently published authors, Tom has been at the forefront of the process innovation, knowledge management, and analytics and big data movements. So he pioneered the concept of competing on analytics with his 2006 Harvard Business Review article and his 2007 book by the same name. Since then, he has continued to provide cutting-edge insights on how companies can use analytics, big data, and AI to their advantage. And Tom's book, co-authored with Julia Kirby, Only Humans Need Apply, Winners and Losers in the Age of Smart Machines, offers tangible tools for individuals who need to work with cognitive technologies. So we have a very special guest with us today that we can dive into different areas and topics, starting from AI, big data, analytics, knowledge management, and such. But I'd like to kick things off by asking you the first question of what inspired you to pursue a career in analytics and data science, and within both academia as well as then transitioning a little bit collaborating with more in the private sector as well.
Sure. Well, I was in graduate, even late undergraduate and throughout graduate school, I was a sort of a consultant to people doing statistical computing for their academic work. I sort of paid my way through graduate school that way, and I liked it a lot. I got more and more, I was a sociologist by academic background. I got more and more interested in computing, but then I got into, when I became a consultant, I got into business schools. I sort of left analytics for quite a while, and I was doing stuff like, I don't know, business process reengineering and knowledge management and so on. And I remember I was doing some knowledge management work, and it's kind of the steam was going out of that area a little bit. And I thought, there's this whole area of knowledge that's derived from data that we don't really focus on enough. This was kind of in the business intelligence era. So I fortunately got some money from SAS and Intel to do some research on their customers about what they were doing with business intelligence. And it turns out they were doing more than that. That whole competing on analytics idea came out of there. And then that sort of evolved into big data, and that evolved into AI. So that's kept me going for, 20-something years now. In one aspect of it or another. And I think I have 8 or 9 books. I don't know exactly how many, but more than anybody would want to read, certainly.
There's definitely plenty of books, and as well as articles as well. So throughout your 20 years, I mean, you've seen the knowledge management, the data starting, and then leveraging analytics to drive some predictions on that data, some user behavior and whatnot. But then it goes to the more artificial intelligence to better understand the patterns and then build application layer on top of that. So throughout your research, what were some of the insights that you had that first you thought some enterprises and customers weren't able to adopt quickly, or maybe resistant to change a little bit? And then what were some that were quick to adopt, and then how different was their mindset?
That's a good question. I think you could argue, I started really around 2000 with an article called Data to Knowledge to Results, Building an Analytical Capability, and nobody paid any attention to that at all. I don't know if it was a not as widely read a journal, maybe, or I don't know. Maybe the timing wasn't right. But when I started writing about how companies compete on analytics, I think they were quite interested in doing more with analytics, but it's always been a challenge to get companies to compete on analytics or to compete on AI. My most recent work is basically about competing on AI, although we didn't really call it that. The book's called All In on AI. And I think, companies aren't really ready to go all in on anything that they don't fully understand. So it's been a struggle, I think, to get the competing and the strategy-oriented approaches adopted. But certainly, there's been a huge increase in the number of companies that are, doing more with analytics and have chief analytics officers and AI experiments anyway, if not, large-scale commitments. So I think it's a matter of just how much scale they're willing to, adopt, how much they're willing to commit to this. That's the organizational change challenge.
You think, like, as they take a lot of time to adopt in their change management, as well as structure how they can adopt the technology, there are new startups forming. You just address that niche.
Yeah. I think that's the big issue. These legacy companies, which I've always been quite interested in because of the challenges of transforming them into some organization that can compete with startups. But if they don't succeed, then they go out of business or lose market share or whatever to the startups. And there are, I've had a fair amount of exposure to digital native companies over the years, and the big difference between them is and the legacy companies is you don't have to persuade them that analytics are important. You don't have to tell them that they should do stuff with analytics, and they don't even, not everybody. I've done some work. I've had some students from Google and so on, and they were in parts of Google that were not terribly analytical. But in general, the company is extremely analytical. Same with Facebook and Airbnb and Uber and so on. And you don't have to persuade them that they should do something. They're doing a lot. They don't even have a need for chief analytics officers or whatever. It's just kind of pervasive in those companies. So that is the big difference. And, I would like it for these businesses that have been around, longer than Silicon Valley to be able to evolve quickly into a form that will, last over time and let them compete with those digital native companies. But not everyone seems up to the task.
How do you see the culture of the companies impacting this? Because I think the startups, because they're small, they're able to move fast, and obviously Google and Facebook are massive right now. But some of the roles and tasks to do are already embedded in the roles. So they do not need someone else to drive this new initiative and whatnot. Whereas in an enterprise that has been doing this maybe 300 years, 200 years, or they have systems from 1950s, legacy applications and whatnot. So they will need to really change the way people think, the way people approach the problem solving, to then adopt these skills. So what are your thoughts around company as a culture, but also the talent pool within these two different companies, and then what kind of digital skill set they can adopt?
Yeah, I think it is largely a matter of culture, and I've done some surveys, usually with a guy named Randy Bean at New Vantage Partners. Every year, he's been doing a survey of chief data and analytics officer types, and every year we ask, do you have a data-driven culture? Are you a data-driven organization? And it doesn't get better. I mean, it's typically maybe 25% say they do, and a lot of them are financial services companies. You'd think they have so much data that they would be highly analytical. So, I think a lot about why that is, why even the numbers have gotten worse over the past decade in some cases. And I think it's just companies don't really have very many initiatives to change the culture in that direction. They spend a lot of money on technology, obviously, and there's this kind of feeling that, if you lead the horse to water, it will drink, but that often doesn't happen. And so I think we just need more explicit initiatives to address culture. But, that probably won't happen unless the CEO is already a believer. If the CEO is a believer, then maybe, they're moving in the right direction already culturally. But I think it comes down to culture, and what drives culture, of course, is the desires of the senior management team, particularly the CEO, but probably broader than that.
Mm-hmm. And that would make sense, I think, like similar to other initiatives. If the directive comes from top to bottom, then it's faster to adopt, easier to not challenge that approach.
Yeah, and certainly there are some companies that I've worked with that the CEO was a big believer, and for a while they did all sorts of fantastic things. I have a long-term friend, and he was a neighbor at one point, and Gary Loveman, he was a Harvard Business School professor when I first got to know him. Our kids played baseball together. Then he left Harvard and went out to first Harrah's, and that became Caesars. He became CEO, was the world's largest gaming or gambling company, if you prefer that term. And they were hugely analytical because he was an absolute believer that analytics were going to make them successful. And he hired people and he fired people based on how analytical they were and so on. But then he left, and it kind of devolved back into the typical gambling company in terms of its orientation to analytics. I mean, some didn't go away totally, but not nearly as strong as it was. So I think it's you've got to build it so that it's not just in the minds of one CEO or one senior executive, something that really becomes well established throughout the organization.
Mm-hmm. I think as part of the people adopting certain skills and then the change, there's also the book The Power of Habits highlighted really well, especially the way people do the trigger, action, and reward mechanism, and then there were some examples around Caesars in the book as well, like the way they interact with the gaming to be able to make it more addictive. But also there's the portion that right now in today's technologies and enterprises leverage similar type of habit building concepts across their platforms, including Facebook that everyone knows at this point right now.
Bad habits.
Bad habits. So it's even more widespread. So like analytics and AI can drive these habit building applications that can be both detrimental and beneficial for the user. Based on your experience and exposure, what do you think?
I think that there is some potential there, and we've seen how well it works to inculcate bad behaviors in social media-oriented companies. And in my latest book, we looked also at companies who were attempting to create more positive types of behavior change, again, through the combination of analytics and behavioral economics type nudges. And most of them were insurance companies. And I think they finally, it took them a while, but they sort of realized, well, why should we just, pay people when they get sick? Maybe we could try to make them be well more of the time. And so we talked about Anthem and some other Manulife in Canada, a number of other companies trying to use data and analytics to nudge their customers into better health behaviors. And then I realized at one point that's what Progressive has been doing with this, usage-based insurance, not only making you pay more, which that's certainly a part of it if you're a bad driver, but also telling you if you're a bad driver and trying to get you not to be a bad driver. And in fact, Gary Loveman, the former CEO of Caesars, is now in a company. He tried to do this in a big insurance company. I won't say who it is, but it was just way too expensive, even to add, your cell phone number and your email to their customer database. They said it's going to cost tens of millions. So he said, okay, I got to do this as a startup. And it's called Well, and it's using nudges and a lot of analytics and AI to create better behaviors. So I think there's some possibilities there. It's still early days. We don't really know if that is going to work. But we might as well be trying for good behaviors rather than the bad that we've seen.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of as the companies adopt this habit building approaches, there's also the regulations, and then the ethics teams are forming within the enterprises to help regulate some of those activities.
But then they fire all the ethics people. That seems to be the pattern. Happened this week at Microsoft, or at least all the centralized ethics people, and it happened at Google and so on. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah, it's definitely some part of it is more for the eyes that look, we're doing something because we have a team, and some part of it is the government's imposed that we have to have this team, but we can reduce their headcount. And then the third part is I think this will be the more idealist in me. They are actually collaborating very together and then building those habit building apps.
Yeah, I've been kind of disappointed in these vendors because I wrote something about Microsoft a few years ago, and I thought they were quite focused on ethics and so on, and now it's sort of, we don't need this centralized ethics team anymore. And I think I think some of the stuff that OpenAI has done is quite impressive. I don't think they should have just turned it loose on society without making it work a little better, just so they could be ahead of Google or whatever, to try to bring some new market share to Bing. So I'm a little disappointed in the whole industry, frankly.
Mm-hmm. I've seen in an interview that Sam Altman had, apparently they have a more ethics team, or a team that's more interactive with the way people can work with ChatGPT and generative technologies early on, to be able to then make it more friendly and less toxic of an AI, which is interesting compared to how the others were approaching it.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've worked a lot on making it less toxic, and Microsoft should have learned a big lesson there with Tay a few years ago, which became toxic really quickly in the U.S. version. The Chinese version did not become toxic, which probably tells you something about the different cultures of the two countries. But I think, and I do understand that having people try things out is really the only way you learn fully, is this useful and helpful or not. But I think it came a little fast, and they changed their perspective. They did not release GPT-2 broadly, and they were quite conservative about releasing GPT-3 broadly, but ChatGPT and GPT-4 now, which was announced yesterday, they're much less concerned, apparently. So.
I think there was also, it was interesting to see a chatbot succeed as well, because like chatbots used to be an app that everyone hated. Like everyone said, connect me to a representative immediately after speaking to chatbot.
Press 0 as quickly as possible or whatever. Yeah, and I think there are significant possibilities for specialized chatbots, not just the kind of generic one trained on the internet, but specialized ones. And a number of the companies that I work with are trying to sort of fine-tune train the latest generation of generative tools on their own content. In fact, I was supposed to have a call today with Morgan Stanley, which is doing this. A couple of insurance companies thinking about insurance transaction-oriented chatbot that would help. But it's still early days. I don't think we know yet. Will all those crazy things that make their way into ChatGPT conversations, will that end up being something that happens in a chat about making a hotel reservation or whatever? I think there are ways to avoid that in fine-tune training, but I'm not entirely sure yet. I'm trying to talk to companies about it.
What was the first thing that came to your mind when you saw it happening? I mean, especially building up on your recent book, especially leveraging AI, when you saw the generative tech coming up. Obviously, the way, excluding the way the public reacted, what was your personal impression of it?
In my latest book, we talked about it a moderate amount. It was really mostly about code generation, because Deloitte was working with OpenAI on trying out how well it worked for code generation. And there'd been some other articles in the New York Times and other places about code generation, the GitHub Copilot and OpenAI capabilities to do that. I forget what they called it. But there wasn't that much in the world at large yet about the sort of conversational stuff. The Facebook conversational tool was not very good. I had tried out GPT-3 for, writing paragraphs and so on, and it was amazingly good, I thought. But the only thing I was really surprised about was how quickly it was adapted to conversation. And then I was surprised at some of the crazy emotions that it experienced. Love, lust, hatred. It didn't take long until all of the emotions in humans made their way into ChatGPT.
Yeah. and it had I think it has like 60 billion data points and whatnot, so it's probably have all the emotions at once.
175 billion parameters and train on over 500 billion pieces of text. So it's not surprising that some of them were toxic. And I don't know, frankly, how you, other than, I guess, feeding it a bunch of prompts and seeing what comes out, nobody understands what's inside these models, which is kind of the scary part and maybe the magical part as well. But I don't know, how do you remove a toxic parameter or 2 or 20 or whatever out of 175 billion? I think that would be quite challenging. I'm glad that's not my job. But I hope somebody is trying to figure that out. I think it's really tough.
Yes, and that will lead to obviously more moderation and ability to produce more positive content and whatnot. Like I think right now a lot of the companies are looking to leverage these models and then build an application layer on top of these models, and then have the users interact with that application interface. So I've seen the Duolingo use case. I've seen a few other use cases that I use.
One of our friends in Boston at what's the outbound CRM. HubSpot has one like that as well. It seems quite effective.
It was very interesting at the HBS Tech Conference, I believe it was 2-3 weeks ago. The CTO of HubSpot was there as well, and then he briefly talked about it. Around like now he was saying like essentially this is the number one topic is keeping me up at night, because if somebody goes ahead and build a product that can compete with HubSpot, then they will maybe essentially tying to our previous points like on losing that competitive edge. And even though they like to call themselves as a startup after 10 years plus, they're a big company now.
Yeah, and Salesforce just announced that they have interface using GPT, and I think maybe one of the more pervasive uses of this technology will be as you suggest, the kind of front end user interface for almost every piece of software.
What were some of the use cases that you saw in the like as a professor that could be adopted, like grading homework to helping writing with papers and whatnot?
Yeah, grading would be nice. I don't know. I haven't seen anything like that. But I think we're sort of many educators are sort of missing out on the potential of this technology, and it's kind of like the reaction that people had to using calculators in math and how they were prohibited and so on. And now, of course, who really remembers how to do some complicated long division? I think it's nice to have it in books in case you need it, but you don't really need to practice it very much. And I think that we should be encouraging students to try it out and, of course, edit it, what it comes out with. And I think it's just going to be the way we work, and we might as well get students interested in that. So in my AI class, I'm definitely going to have students write something using, maybe I'll let them choose which, I'm not teaching till the summer, I haven't decided for sure, I'll let them choose which generative tool they use and then edit it and, change their prompts and go on, and I'll grade them on what came out. Of course, I think you should tell your teacher or your boss or whatever that you're using this tool, but this is going to be a big competitive advantage for any knowledge worker that knows how to do this stuff.
And I think they have they will develop some capabilities, I believe Stanford did, to help out with what content is actually written by the generative tech to be able to do cross verification. I'm not sure if it works well. I'm sure it has 80% and whatnot also predict the rate and those texts, but it's an interesting concept as well.
Yeah, and there was a Princeton guy who had a tool that could identify whether something was generated. It's going to be sort of a battle, I think, between the generative AI tools and the tool to detect generative AI. But in the long run, I think if we're not worried about how high quality content is produced, then I think we'll be better off. But that at the moment, at least, that means a lot of tinkering with different prompts and doing different edits on it when it comes out. Mm-hmm. And I've also, by the way, I think you used to work with Ian Barkin, I think, right, at Symphony and so on. He was on your podcast, wasn't he?
Yes, he was on my podcast. He was one of the first ones.
Okay, yeah, he's a great guy. And we're doing some work together on sort of citizen data science and automation and so on. And so he did some research investigation using, I think it was ChatGPT, and it did a really good job, actually. It summarized a lot of things that had been written about that topic, even some articles that are behind paywalls. I don't know how it does that, but it's great. We would never have found them probably. But.
Yeah, that's really cool. And especially the access that it has. I mean, in some URLs, like you'd be able to tell, like, here's a URL, go read about what is in there, and then summarize it back to me. And some of them it works.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a great capability. I haven't tried. I have access, I guess, to GPT-4. I haven't tried that yet, but I guess the Bing version of GPT is based on GPT-4, so I don't know.
And to your point, so like you're thinking about exploring the citizen data scientist, maybe citizen developer concept more. What are some of the areas that you guys are looking to explore that can help the industry to go forward?
Well, again, there's a big organizational change issue, and companies, I think, are in many cases reluctant to embark upon the citizen journey for not any great reason. Sometimes it's IT people objecting, sometimes for good reason, sometimes for bad. They're maybe afraid they're going to lose their job, or maybe they're just they don't want to spend all their time cleaning up the bad project work that citizens have done. But in the companies that do this well, there are a few key attributes. Ian has persuaded me, you have to do recruitment well. And I have found this in citizen data science space, that some companies have really struggled with finding people who want to be citizen data scientists, even though they're willing to train them and so on. You have to think about, tool-related standards and so on. There's the issue of, do you have a special version of that tool? Like, what is it? Studio X is that the UiPath end user version, or can you just turn them loose on the regular offering? And those are, even the regular offerings are getting pretty easy to use these days, particularly in the automation space. Then you sort of need maybe some certification and training, or probably training first, then certification. There's a sort of a community building component to it, where you have people meet occasionally and share their ideas and so on. And then there's, I think, an infrastructure component where you say, in the data science space, here are a bunch of features that have been pre-engineered, and we'll put it in a feature store. And automation, you can have a little hub of the automation automations, I guess. I never really liked that as a plural noun, but anyway, all of the ones that have already been developed so that people can access them and save a lot of time and so on. So I think there is a fair amount of work that an organization can do to make citizens much more likely to be successful. But the biggest issue is many of them just don't try it at all.
Yeah, and then they will not build the guardrails as well. And like, I see community as being very impactful to knowledge exchange. And so that if somebody has any question, and this happens a lot in even the advanced developers, right? Like, they typically go to Stack Overflow and then copy and paste into their canvas. And I think for citizen developers, it's more on the low code and side, and then they will have also similar questions on how to tackle these things. But if there's a community where the network effects are enabled, that can really help people to go forward.
Yeah, and I think that generative stuff is going to enter all of these spaces, and it's going to make God knows it's going to generate a lot of program code. It's going to be the interface for a lot of these tools. It's going to make it much easier for citizens to do this work.
So in
By the
terms
way,
of
Ian found some interesting things on I don't know, Reddit and other Discord about people holding down multiple jobs because they've automated the task in one job, and then they have time to do the things they need to do as a human in the other jobs that they have, or maybe they've automated two jobs and they hold a third job or whatever. So it's called overemployed.
Yeah, it's enabling those automations to do the work.
Exactly. And that
Yeah,
is a
that's
good way to, if you want to make some money from automation, that you can, you start piling up those jobs. You can bring down a fair amount of cash.
yeah, that's really like maximizing productivity at best and making
Yeah,
money while still.
individual level
Yeah,
productivity, if not organizational level productivity.
yeah, yeah. And in terms of right now building up to this, what do you think is waiting the world within the next 4 to 5 years now, based on what you see, and maybe even you can allow some utopic thinking as well.
Yeah, I mean, I in general have been quite positive about AI, and I wasn't terribly worried about it kind of becoming our robot overlords and killing us all. Uh, Certainly now I'm a little bit more concerned, I think, now that I see what uh, the generative tools can do. And I think we probably need to get a bit more serious about regulations, certainly in the US. I think the US is, I mean, the EU is well ahead of us in that regard. And it could, I think, as somebody said on a podcast I was listening to the other day, it could be a thermonuclear bomb of disinformation, and that could have some really serious consequences. Right now the deep fakes are not very good, but I think before long they're going to be really quite good, and there's so many things that could go wrong there. So I think we need to apply the brakes a little bit from a regulatory standpoint, which I didn't think that way until recently. And I think for me the biggest advance from some of these tools will be going back to what I did 25 years ago in knowledge management, to really manage the knowledge of an organization so that people can access it easily without necessarily having to, put it into Lotus Notes or SharePoint or whatever. And that's, it's not going to be easy to do all this fine-tuned training. And I think there'll be different levels. I was talking to a law firm the other day about this, and they said, well, yeah, there's the basic large language model, and then there's already a couple of versions of law-oriented generative tools below that. But then you have to say, well, okay, UK law, this was a UK lawyer I was talking to, UK law is different from US law. So we sort of have to have different versions for that. And real estate law is different from, I don't know, securities law or family law or whatever. So we have to have different versions. And then there may be versions for each specific law firm. So we're going to be proliferating a lot of generative tools around that may get a little confusing at times. But I think it does mean that we'll have access to the Morgan Stanley people were saying they trained GPT-4 on 100,000 of their documents, and it makes it possible for everybody to sort of have the resources, the intellectual resources of the entire firm at their fingertips with a prompt. And so that's very exciting, I think.
Mhm.
And who knows what it'll do. I'm trying to get that woman. They took this website CNET and they fired a number of the journalists and they made the editor she's no longer the editor. She's in charge of AI now. So when you talked to me about this, and she said, yes, but let me be in my job for a month or so. I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. So it's going to, I think, mean a lot of changes in organizations. And more, I'm persuaded that the people who have something to fear from all of this are the people who refuse to work with AI, to experiment a little bit with the generative tools, to edit AI systems outputs, to tinker with prompts, et cetera, et cetera. I just think everybody's going to be working with AI before long. If you're a knowledge worker, maybe even that'll be true of robot ditch diggers and so on as well, but hasn't been that way thus far.
Yeah, I think the human in the loop will become the norm for many of the enterprises, and as they track with the software, and there will be also differences between somebody who is able to leverage the like generative tech and automation at large versus somebody who's not. And that productivity level, and then you touched on that really well, somebody who's doing already 4 jobs and in one day versus somebody who's barely doing 1 job in a single day, and maybe they're the identical tasks. That will definitely be a game changer moving forward from the people's standpoint.
Yeah, and I still sort of feel that if you don't need a human in the loop, it's probably not an interesting enough job for a human to be performing anyway. Although, there's some people who don't like to be challenged much at work and who don't are happy doing the same thing over and over again. I think for them, it's going to be tough. But if you are open to new ways of working and dealing with technology and so on, I think you'll be fine for the next until the singularity happens, and then all bets are off.
Yeah, that is very true. And I've seen that Sam Altman's new company is trying to also tie to identity of content, and then I think like they do an iris check on human verification to make sure. So it's no longer going to be choosing pictures and finding traffic lamps. Maybe at some point in the future.
Yeah. Well, I hope so, and I think we'll need some kind of watermark approaches. I use DALL-E 2 a fair amount for image generation. I've replaced my possibly illegal Google images that I put into my PowerPoints and so on mostly with DALL-E 2 now. And I love the fact that there's that little multicolor watermark in the corner. And I think we need to find ways to do that for text as well. And then, maybe people won't be as worried about it. And it'll say, some of this text was generated by such and such a program or whatever, but it was edited by this human or whatever. It does also mean, I think, though, that editing skills become more important than first draft capabilities. And I think most of us are good at one or the other. I hate editing. I wish there were an editing system that did a good job rather than a first draft system that did a good job. That's my thing that I do well. But maybe there'll be both at some point. I don't know. But right now, you really need to be a good editor.
And in terms of, and this is more in the theoretical thinking, but like the more I look at it on AI generating, creating content with humans, building paragraphs to codes to images. And then on the other hand, there was the promise of blockchain at some point to be able to track things down, to be able to make everything recognizable. Do you see any intersection point that both technologies can complement each other? Obviously, there's the like Bitcoin market and exchanges. There's the NFT. So like going beyond all of that, and just as technology itself of the promise that things are transparent and trackable.
Yeah, I never really focused all that much on blockchain. I've always been more of a kind of what you do with information kind of guy than a transaction-oriented person. Transactional technologies, which I always thought blockchain was. And I must say I was puzzled a long time ago of if this is such a great way to sort of protect individual ownership and so on, why do we have so many frauds and breaches and hacks in this space? I still have yet to get a good explanation of that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of the exploration that companies were doing with blockchain, for example, Maersk, the big shipping line, had a thing for keeping track of all their containers and so on. They were working with IBM and they dropped that project. So I don't have really high hopes at the moment for rekindling it quickly. I think there's something that needs to change in the technology to make it safer than it's turned out to be, and to bring about that clarity of creation and ownership and so on that we were promised in that area.
I think the model layer needs to really keep up with their quality to be able to then allow more use cases to come out, and more tangible use cases that businesses can adopt. Well, that said, we are at time right now. Thank you very much for joining the discussion. I really enjoyed what we talked about. I think we covered a lot of topics that is going to be very impactful to the lives of the people in the future, especially adoption of automation, analytics, adoption of generative tech, some cultural aspects of enterprises to adopt the change, and as well as citizen development, citizen data scientists with tying to the low code. I think this was a very, very insightful discussion. So I really appreciate you taking the time and chatting with me.
Thanks. We did not use the letters RPA. Is that allowed on this podcast?
Yeah, that is true. That is true. It is allowed. It is allowed, but we did not. We'll get to that as well.
Okay. Nice talking to you, Al.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. I'll stop recording.